Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Qizhi. Coming up in this edition, the suspect of the attempted assassination on former US President Donald Trump is facing 2 gun crime charges or more as the investigation continues. Typhoon Babinca has weakened to a tropical storm as it continues to move inland after hitting Shanghai. And storm Boris has swept across Central Europe, leaving at least 18 dead and causing mass flooding and evacuations. Let's begin in North America. A U.S. federal court in West Palm Beach, Florida, has charged the suspect in the attempted assassination of presidential candidate Donald Trump with 2 gun crimes. Meanwhile, new details have emerged about the 58-year-old, who authorities say did not fire any shots at Trump's golf club where the former president was playing. Nitsa Soledad Paris has more.
Ryan Wesley Routh is a suspect, a 58-year-old. He's a native from North Carolina. He was currently residing in Hawaii. He was in the vicinity of Trump's international golf course for close to 12 hours before being discovered by the Secret Service agents. He was hiding in the bushes when one of these Secret Service agents saw the rifle barrel, and then that agent shot at the area. The suspect fled the scene, leaving his AK-47 with a scope, 2 bags, a GoPro camera, and even some food. Routh has an extensive criminal history. Now, from 1997 to 2010, he had numerous felony charges for stolen goods. He was charged for possessions of weapons of mass destruction. And in 2019, the FBI received a tip indicating that Routh, already a felon, was in the possession of the firearm. The acting Secret Service director, Ronald Rao Jr., wanted to defend his agents, but he also acknowledged that they need a paradigm shift as well as more resources.
The way we are positioned right now in this dynamic threat environment, it has given me guidance to say, you know what, we need to look at what our protective methodology is. We need to get out of a reactive model and get to a readiness model.
Dressed in a blue jumpsuit and restrained in handcuffs, the suspect listened to the charges against him with a public defender by his side. The 2 charges were possessing a firearm as a felon and possessing a firearm with an obliterated serial number. Now, Routh will be back here on September 23rd for a detention hearing. In the meantime, the investigation continues.
That's Nitsa Soledad Paris reporting from West Palm Beach, Florida. Israel's ambassador to the United Nations claims it has evidence to prove that Hamas is running the UN aid agency UNRWA in the Gaza Strip. The UN Security Council also met to discuss the humanitarian situation in the enclave, with the UN saying the situation remains dire. Jody Jacobs reports from the United Nations in New York.
It was a scathing attack on the United Nations humanitarian agency in Gaza that started off the morning here in New York. Israel's permanent representative to the UN telling reporters that it has sufficient evidence to prove that Hamas terrorists are running the organization in the Gaza Strip. Danny Dannon's remarks come after last week's Israeli airstrike that hit an UNRWA school in the enclave. At the time, the school was being used as a shelter for thousands of homeless Palestinians.
We must draw a line. UNRWA Gaza has become nothing more than a cartel, fostering hatred and prolonging misery in Gaza. How long will the UN continue to bury its head in the sand? How long will it ignore the fact that UNRWA Gaza has become a front for Hamas terrorists? To call these murderers aid workers is an insult.
Shortly after Dannon's remarks, the UN Security Council convened to discuss the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. The UN indicating that the horrors of the past 11 months have made it clear that a political solution is the only sustainable path forward. It says without a political solution, the cycle of suffering will continue.
Time is slipping away as a man-made humanitarian crisis has turned Gaza into the abyss. It cannot be repeated enough. We need an immediate ceasefire, the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, and unimpeded, continuous humanitarian access to deliver aid at scale throughout the Gaza Strip. The continued lack of effective protection for civilians in Gaza is unconscionable.
But several council members again questioned when it all will end.
We urge the U.S. to show a responsible attitude, use the significant influence it holds over the party, and take tangible action to prevail upon Israel to cease its military operations without delay, as demanded by the Council resolutions, to give the long-suffering Palestinian people a chance to live.
The United Nations will this week hold several meetings on the situation in Gaza, with the General Assembly convening on Tuesday to vote on a draft resolution proposed by the State of Palestine demanding Israel end its unlawful presence in the occupied Palestinian territory within 6 months.
That was Jody Jacobs from the UN headquarters in New York. The social media app TikTok and its parent company ByteDance have argued in court against a U.S. law that would ban it in the country. The law gives ByteDance until January 19, 2025 to sell or divest TikTok's U.S. assets or face a ban. The U.S. government alleges TikTok poses a national security threat. A group of users claim the ban violates free speech and is unconstitutional. Owen Fairclough has more.
It's considered one of the most creative social media platforms and the launchpad for countless careers and businesses. But is TikTok facing an existential crisis? That's after US President Joe Biden ordered TikTok to either divest itself, i.e. find a buyer here in the United States for its US operations, or risk being shut down early next year. Now, TikTok's owners have appealed that, and we're appealing that in a Washington, D.C. appeals court this Monday. The central claim by the Biden administration is that they're concerned that TikTok could be forced to hand over sensitive user data to the Chinese government, and that could be weaponized on the platform in terms of malicious influences and so on. Now, TikTok says there's simply no evidence of this taking place and insisting it is a fully independent company, independent of the Chinese government. It's also saying that it's offered multiple guardrails, if you like, to the US government to make the site even more secure and free of the kind of influences that the US government is concerned about. TikTok has also been supported by free speech defenders who say that the idea of banning a social media platform is simply unconstitutional, where free speech is enshrined in the US Constitution. There's also a political dimension to all of this as well. Donald Trump, when he was US president, tried to ban TikTok twice using executive orders, but now says he's a fan of the platform, not least because much of his campaign material is on TikTok to try and target younger voters. Kamala Harris, she supports the White House line, which is essentially the White House wants to see TikTok find a US buyer so it can continue its US operations. That's simply not financially viable for TikTok, who says it cannot support different apps across the world with different content. It would simply be a no-go for advertisers as well. So there's complications here. The timing of this is also very significant. If TikTok is shut down, that would take place on January the 19th, just a day before the inauguration of whoever is the next US president, Donald Trump or Kamala Harris. The problem, though, for TikTok is that the idea of banning it has fairly wide bipartisan congressional support from many lawmakers who've long been hawkish on China, particularly when it comes to trade, particularly when it comes to defense. So there is an issue there for lawmakers who are arguably more motivated to ban TikTok than either Donald Trump or Kamala Harris. In this case, both sides have asked for a judgment, a ruling on whether TikTok has to be sold or can continue. They want that ruling by December the 6th.
That was Owen Fairclough on TikTok's ban hearing. Turning to Asia, Typhoon Babinca has weakened to a tropical storm and continues to move inland after hitting Shanghai. It uprooted trees and disrupted power supply, but caused no deaths in the metropolis. Cleanup is underway as Babinca travels northwest to provinces including Anhui and Henan. In the eastern city of Suzhou, authorities have relocated residents. Dai Kai-yi visited them at one temporary shelter.
The wind continues to blast here in China's eastern Suzhou. I'm right outside the gate of a kindergarten, which is now turned into a settlement place for construction workers nearby. I've been told this is one of the largest settlement places in this district. I've been told that there are over 300 people staying here. They were relocated to this kindergarten starting from Sunday afternoon, and the organizers have provided them with drinking water, food, and daily essentials.
The staff here have been very welcoming. taking great care of the place we've been assigned to, including the cleanliness and everything else. I'm truly grateful.
The government's quick response has really put us at ease. With the typhoon hitting during Mid-Autumn Festival, they moved us to a safe and comfortable place that feels like home.
There are around 15 schools in Shangcheng district of Suzhou that were turned into a settlement point. A total of over 2,100 people were relocated. Right from here, you can hear the strong wind. You can feel the power of this typhoon. But authorities here in Suzhou and some of the other cities quickly took preventive measures, making sure no one is left behind.
That's Dai Kai-yi in Suzhou on measures to protect the people from the damages of typhoons. Turning to Europe, more than a dozen people have died in Central and Eastern Europe in floods brought about by a powerful storm. Poland and the Czech Republic are among the worst affected countries. The region is anticipating more heavy rains as Hungary makes preparations for the challenge. Pablo Guterres reports from Budapest.
Storm Boris has brought some of the heaviest rainfall in decades to Central and Eastern Europe, causing catastrophic flooding, widespread evacuations, and deaths. In Poland, flood waters led to a fatal drowning and the collapse of critical infrastructure. Meanwhile, in Austria, a firefighter lost his life during rescue efforts. Romania has also been heavily impacted with hundreds of homes damaged and several fatalities reported. Hungary is preparing for the storm's impact in the coming days as the water levels in the Danube River continue to rise. Now, the government has issued warnings, suspended transport services, and is preparing for possible evacuations as the situation worsens. Prime Minister Viktor Orban has canceled travel plans to Strasbourg to remain here in Hungary overseeing emergency flood preparations. Orban met with the country's flood protection task force early Monday to ensure all available resources are being used to protect vulnerable areas. With floodwaters expected to peak in the second half of the week, Hungary is on high alert, and officials remain hopeful that the measures in place will help reduce the damage as Storm Boris continues its destructive path through the region.
That was Pablo Guterres reporting on flood responses in Hungary. Finally, in Africa, a cholera outbreak is hitting central, northern and eastern states of Sudan. Authorities have reported over 9,500 cases and 315 deaths. Sudan is in the midst of a civil war that began in April last year. The country attributed the spread of cholera to deteriorating environmental conditions caused by the war and the use of unclean water. Naba Muhiddin reports from Sudan.
Voluntary medical groups have sounded the alarm on a worrying cholera outbreak across war-torn Sudan. The number of watery diarrhea cases in the nation's capital, Khartoum alone, has surpassed 4,000. Sudanese authorities declared a cholera outbreak last month, one which is badly affecting the states of Kassala, Gadaref, and River Nile, and is present in Al Jazeera and Khartoum. Heavy rains and floods have destroyed water and sanitation infrastructure and put both hosting and internally displaced communities in peril. It's the latest crisis to hit Sudan's health system, which has been suffering for months due to the ongoing conflict, with 80% of facilities non-operational. There are also reports of severe medicine and other supply shortages.
That was Naba Muhiddin on the cholera outbreak in Sudan. Recapping today's headlines, the suspect of the attempted assassination on former US President Donald Trump is facing 2 gun crime charges or more as the investigation continues. Typhoon Babinca has weakened to a tropical storm as it continues to move inland after hitting Shanghai. And Storm Boris has swept across Central Europe, leaving at least 18 dead and causing mass flooding and evacuations. That's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to The Beijing Hour, a 1-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Xi Zhi. Thank you for listening.